My grandmother left me everything, and my father made sure I never knew. Not for a week, not for a month, for 3 years. 3 years while I was working double shifts at a hospital in Knoxville, Tennessee, eating gas station sandwiches for dinner, and wondering why the woman who used to slip $20 bills into my coat pocket at Christmas had left me completely out of her will. That's what he told me. That's what all of them told me. And I believed it. Because why wouldn't I? He was my dad. Here's the thing about trusting the wrong person with the truth. You don't find out they lied. You stumble into it. By accident. On a Thursday afternoon when you weren't even looking. Have you ever been lied to by someone you never thought would? Drop it in the comments, because I used to think I was the only one. Let me take you back. My grandmother's name was Loretta May Hutchins. She lived in a pale yellow house on Sycamore Road in Cookeville, Tennessee. The kind of house with a screen door that slapped shut every single time you walked through it, and a kitchen that always smelled like burnt coffee and pine sol. She kept a ceramic rooster on top of the refrigerator. I have no idea why. It was just always there. She raised me, basically. My mom left when I was 4. No big dramatic goodbye, no note, just gone. My dad, Richard. He was around. But around is doing a lot of work in that sentence. He showed up on birthdays. Sometimes. He paid child support until the checks got inconsistent, and then my grandmother stopped talking about it. She just filled the gap herself. Quietly. The way she did everything. I'm not going to stand here and pretend my grandmother was a saint. She wasn't. She had opinions. Strong ones. She didn't approve of my dad's second wife, Karen. She said Karen had hungry eyes. I was 12 when she said that, and I didn't know what it meant. I do now. So when Loretta died in March, 3 years ago, I was 29, living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Knoxville, working nights in the ICU. I couldn't even get the week off for the funeral. My supervisor denied my bereavement request because I wasn't listed as an immediate family member on my hospital paperwork. I'd filled it out wrong. I know that sounds unbelievable, but that's the kind of month I was having. My dad called me. He said Loretta had left everything, the house, the savings account, all of it, to him. Equally split between him and my Aunt Deborah. He said Loretta had updated the will 2 years before she died, after a, quote, falling out. He said I knew what I'd done. I didn't. I genuinely didn't know what he was talking about. He said I'd been disrespectful at Christmas. I thought about that Christmas for weeks afterward. I couldn't come up with a single thing. But you know what I did? I let it go. Because that's what I did. That was my flaw. I called it being the bigger person. My therapist later called it conflict aversion rooted in early abandonment. Potato, potato. Either way, I swallowed it. Told myself Loretta had her reasons. Told myself I'd be okay. If your own family told you that you'd done something wrong but couldn't tell you what, would you believe them? I did, and I want to know what you would have done. Tell me in the comments. For a year, nothing. I didn't call my dad much. We do the occasional Sunday check-in, 20 minutes, surface level. He'd talk about his garden. I pretend to care. He never brought up Loretta's estate again, and neither did I. Aunt Deborah sent me a birthday card that November, with a $20 bill inside, which felt like either an apology or an insult. I still don't know which. But then small things started not adding up. My cousin Marcus, Deborah's youngest, he mentioned at Thanksgiving that the house on Sycamore Road had been sold. Cash sale. I didn't know houses sold for cash in Cookeville, but apparently this one did. I smiled and nodded. But when I got back to my apartment that night, I sat on my kitchen floor for a long time, staring at the space under my radiator, where the paint was peeling. Something felt wrong. I couldn't name it yet. A few months later, I was on the phone with a childhood friend, Keisha, who still lives in Cookeville, and she mentioned she'd seen Karen at the new restaurant on Main Street. Keisha said Karen had a new car, a white Range Rover. Now look, people buy cars. I know that. But Karen worked part-time at a dental office, scheduling appointments. My dad managed a wholesale lumber supply company in Crossville. Neither of them had Range Rover money. At least, not before. I dismissed it. I told myself I was being bitter. Jealous. I told myself I was constructing a conspiracy because I was still angry about being cut out of the will. My dad wasn't a villain. He was just a man who made choices I didn't understand. That's what I told myself. Over and over. And then I got a letter. Not an email, an actual letter. In a cream-colored envelope with a return address from a law office in Cookeville. Whitfield and Associates. Attorneys at law. I almost threw it away thinking it was junk mail. I opened it standing at my mailbox in the parking lot of my apartment complex. with a Kroger bag cutting into my wrist and car exhaust in the air. The letter was addressed to me by my full legal name, Catherine Louise Hutchins. It said, and I'm paraphrasing because the legal language was dense, that the office of Whitfield & Associates had been attempting to reach me regarding the estate of Loretta May Hutchins, and that there was a matter of a secondary clause in the original trust document that had not yet been executed. I read it twice. Then, a third time. The Kroger bag split. I didn't even notice the groceries on the ground. Right here, this is the moment everything shifted. If you're watching this and you've ever had that feeling where a single piece of paper changes your whole reality, you know exactly what I'm feeling in this parking lot. Subscribe. Because part 2 is where it gets really dark. I called Whitfield & Associates the next morning. I'd barely slept. I sat on my couch with my coffee, going cold beside me, and the letter smoothed flat on the cushion next to me, like it might disappear if I set it down. The office opened at 8:30. I called at 8:29. The paralegal who answered sounded like she'd had this conversation before. Calm. Practiced. Not unkind. She told me to hold for Mr. Whitfield. Gerald Whitfield had been my grandmother's attorney for over 20 years. His voice was low and careful, the kind of voice that's learned to deliver difficult information without drama. He told me that Loretta's original trust, not the will my father had described to me, but an older, more detailed trust document drawn up in 2014, had contained a secondary clause. A protective clause. Loretta had specifically designated a portion of the estate, the house, and a savings account totaling just under $90,000 to pass directly to me upon my 28th birthday, bypassing her son Richard entirely. I'm going to say that number again. $90,000. Mr. Whitfield explained it carefully. The clause had included a condition that the funds could not be released until my 28th birthday, and only if I was located and properly notified. His office had sent letters to my last known address, the apartment I'd moved out of 14 months before I turned 28, the one where the mail was supposed to forward. It didn't. He tried to contact my father for a forwarding address. My father told him I'd moved out of state and wasn't in contact with the family. I set the phone down on my knee for a second. The refrigerator hummed. There was a water stain on the ceiling above my window. I'd been meaning to report to the landlord for 6 months. I picked the phone back up. Mr. Whitfield said the secondary clause was still valid. The trust was structured to hold the assets until I was located and verified. He'd found me through property records. I'd signed a lease in Knoxville 18 months ago. It had taken time to trace. He apologized for that. He sounded like he meant it. Now here's where I want to be precise, because I've had people ask me since then, did I immediately go into revenge mode? No. I didn't. What I actually did was go to work. I had a 12-hour shift starting at 3. I put on my scrubs, drove to the hospital, and spent half the night monitoring a 64-year-old man recovering from bypass surgery. I was on autopilot. My hands did the job. My brain was somewhere else entirely. When I got home at 4 in the morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen, and I started writing down everything I could remember. Every conversation, every date, every offhand comment. The Christmas my dad said I'd been disrespectful. The phone call where he told me I'd been cut out. The Thanksgiving when Marcus mentioned the cash sale of the house. Karen's white Range Rover. I'm not a dramatic person by nature. I don't like confrontation. But I'm organized. I'm methodical. You have to be, working in an IQ. So I approached it the same way I'd approach a patient chart. What do I know? What do I need to verify? What's the timeline? Over the next 6 weeks, I built a paper trail. Mr. Whitfield's office was cooperative. They provided me with copies of the original trust, the secondary clause, the certified letters that had been sent to my old address, and the phone records showing my father had been contacted twice by the firm, and twice told them I was unreachable. I requested the property records for the house on Sycamore Road through the Putnam County Assessor's office. The house had sold 11 months after Loretta died. The buyer was listed as a property holding company. The holding company's registered agent was Karen's maiden name. Let that sit for a second. My dad hadn't just taken the house. He'd laundered it through his wife's business entity. That's not confusion. That's not a misunderstanding about the will. That's a plan. I really need to know, at what point would you have picked up the phone and called him? Because I still hadn't. I was still documenting, still cold, still quiet. Tell me in the comments if you could have held it together that long. My father called me on a Sunday. It was 6 weeks into my audit. He didn't know what I knew. He called to tell me about his garden. The tomatoes were coming in early. The deer had gotten into the squash again. His voice was easy, relaxed. He asked how work was going. I told him it was fine. He said Karen sent her love. I said that was nice of her. He had no idea. That call is the one I think about most. Not the confrontation. Not the legal proceedings. That Sunday call, where he talked for 18 minutes about tomatoes, while I sat at my kitchen table with a manila folder 6 inches thick, sitting right in front of me. That's the moment I understood what he'd calculated. He decided the clause would never surface. He decided I was disorganized enough, distracted enough, far enough away, that the whole thing would just quietly expire. He'd bet on my chaos. He'd bet on my grief making me passive. He was wrong about that. I retained a civil attorney in Knoxville, a woman named Patricia Odum, who specialized in estate disputes and had the energy of someone who'd heard every version of this story and was still furious on behalf of every client. I walked into her office with my manila folder and my legal pad, and I watched her read for 20 minutes without saying a word. Then she looked up and said, "He did this knowingly." Not a question. A statement. We filed. The complaint included intentional interference with inheritance, fraudulent misrepresentation to a third party, that's the law firm, and civil conversion of trust assets. Patricia said the property holding company made it worse for him, not better. It showed intent. It showed premeditation. A judge would see it immediately. My father was served on a Wednesday morning. Marcus called me that same afternoon. He said my dad had gone white as a sheet when the process server showed up at the lumberyard. He said Karen was on the phone with someone for an hour in their car. He said Aunt Debra had called him twice and told him to stay out of it. Nobody called me. Not my dad. Not Karen. For 9 days, nothing. Then his attorney sent a letter to Patricia, suggesting a good faith settlement conversation. Patricia forwarded it to me and wrote one word in the email body: predictable. We didn't settle. Patricia advised against it. The evidence was too clean. We let it go to a hearing. I didn't go. I didn't need to. Patricia represented me. I worked my shift, drove home, ate leftover rice and beans standing at my counter, and waited for her call. She phoned me at 7:15 that evening. The judge had ordered full restitution of the trust assets, plus interest, plus legal fees. The property holding company transaction had been flagged for referral to the district attorney's office for review of potential criminal fraud. I put the phone down on my counter. I stood in my kitchen for a long time. The fridge hummed. A car alarm went off outside, and then stopped. That was it. That was about 8 months ago. The money came through in a structured disbursement. The trust assets, the interest, the legal fee reimbursement. I paid off my car. I put a significant portion into savings. I didn't buy anything extravagant. I didn't feel like celebrating. I'm not sure what I expected to feel. I think I expected relief. And relief did come. Eventually. But it came slow. Like heat through a cold room. You don't feel it arrive. You just realize at some point you're warmer. My father hasn't contacted me directly since the hearing. His attorney sent a letter asking if I'd be open to repairing the relationship at some point in the future. I read it twice and filed it. I haven't responded. I don't know if I will. Aunt Debra sent me a card. No money in it this time. Just a note that said she was sorry, and that she hadn't known the full picture. I believe her. Partially. She benefited either way, and she never asked questions. That's its own kind of choice. Karen's property holding company is still under review by the Dawes office. I don't know how that ends. Patricia says these things move slowly. I've learned to sit with slow. And Loretta, my grandmother, with her ceramic rooster and her pine sole kitchen and her screen door that never stopped slapping shut. She knew. She knew her son well enough to build a wall around what she wanted to leave me. She didn't trust him to do it right, so she went around him. She'd structured that clause like she was watching from somewhere, making sure it couldn't be undone. I think about that a lot. I think about her sitting across from Gerald Whitfield in his Cookville office, spelling out exactly what she wanted for me, anticipating every move her own son might make. She did everything she could from the other side of a legal document. From 2 years before she was even gone. I don't have a neat ending for you. My dad is still out there. He still has his lumber yard. He still has his garden. I assume the tomatoes came in fine this year. I don't know. I stopped keeping track. What I have is the house money, and a therapist I see on Tuesday evenings, and a job I'm good at, and the slow, ongoing work of figuring out which parts of myself I shaped around people who didn't deserve that much of me. That's the real inheritance, I think. not the $90,000. The clarity. Here's the question I can't stop sitting with. If my grandmother hadn't been smart enough to build that clause in, would I have ever known? And if I hadn't known, would I have just kept being the person who let it go? I think about that version of me a lot. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect, I genuinely want to hear from you. Leave it in the comments. And if stories like this one feel familiar, if you know what it's like to be invisible inside your own family, subscribe. Because I'm not done talking about it.